this video, I'll This is Audible.
Brilliance Audio presents the unabridged recording of The Kane Chronicles, Book 1, The Red Pyramid, by Rick Riordan. Performed by Kevin R. Free and Catherine Kelgren. To all my librarian friends, champions of books, true magicians in the house of life, without you, this writer would be lost in the duat. Warning. The following is a digital recording. Listen carefully for the verbal descriptions of important symbols. Background noises such as scuffling, hitting, and cursing by the two speakers have been edited out. The author makes no claims for the authenticity of the recording. It seems impossible that the two young narrators are telling the truth, but you, the listener, must decide for yourself.
1. A Death at the Needle. We only have a few hours, so listen carefully. If you're hearing this story, you're already in danger. Sadie and I might be your only chance. Go to the school. Find the locker. I won't tell you which school or which locker because if you're the right person, you'll find it. The combination is 13, 32, 33. By the time you finish listening, you'll know what those numbers mean. Just remember, the story we're about to tell you isn't complete yet. How it ends will depend on you. The most important thing? When you open the package and find what's inside, don't keep it longer than a week. Sure, it'll be tempting. I mean, it will grant you almost unlimited power. But if you possess it too long, it will consume you. Learn its secrets quickly and pass it on. Hide it for the next person, the way Sadie and I did for you. Then be prepared for your life to get very interesting. Okay. Sadie is telling me to stop stalling and get on with the story. Fine. I guess it started in London, the night our dad blew up the British Museum. My name is Carter Kane. I'm 14, and my home is a suitcase. You think I'm kidding? Since I was 8 years old, my dad and I have traveled the world. I was born in L.A., but my dad's an archaeologist, so his work takes him all over. Mostly we go to Egypt, since that's his specialty. Go into a bookstore, find a book about Egypt, there's a pretty good chance it was written by Dr. Julius Cain. You want to know how Egyptians pulled the brains out of mummies, or built the pyramids, or cursed King Tut's tomb? My dad is your man. Of course, there are other reasons my dad moved around so much, but I didn't know his secret back then. I didn't go to school. My dad homeschooled me, if you can call it homeschooling when you don't have a home. He sort of taught me whatever he thought was important, so I learned a lot about Egypt, and basketball stats, and my dad's favorite musicians. I read a lot, too, pretty much anything I could get my hands on, from Dad's history books to fantasy novels. Because I spent a lot of time sitting around in hotels and airports and dig sites in foreign countries where I didn't know anybody. My dad was always telling me to put the book down and play some ball. You ever try to start a game of pickup basketball in Aswan, Egypt? It's not easy. Anyway, my dad trained me early to keep all my possessions in a single suitcase that fits in an airplane's overhead compartment. My dad packed the same way, except he was allowed an extra work bag for his archaeology tools. Rule number 1. I was not allowed to look in his work bag. That's a rule I never broke, until the day of the explosion. It happened on Christmas Eve. We were in London for visitation day with my sister, Sadie. See, Dad's only allowed 2 days a year with her, one in the winter, one in the summer, because our grandparents hate him. After our mom died, her parents, our grandparents, had this big court battle with Dad. After 6 lawyers, 2 fistfights, and a near-fatal attack with a spatula, don't ask, they won the right to keep Sadie with them in England. She was only 6, 2 years younger than me, and they couldn't keep us both. At least that was their excuse for not taking me. So Sadie was raised as a British school kid, and I traveled around with my dad. We only saw Sadie twice a year, which was fine with me. Shut up, Sadie. Yes, I'm getting to that part. So, anyway, my dad and I had just flown into Heathrow after a couple of delays. It was a drizzly, cold afternoon. The whole taxi ride into the city, my dad seemed kind of nervous. Now, my dad is a big guy. You wouldn't think anything could make him nervous. He has dark brown skin like mine, piercing brown eyes, a bald head, and a goatee, so he looks like a buff, evil scientist. That afternoon, he wore his cashmere winter coat and his best brown suit, the one he used for public lectures. Usually, he exudes so much confidence that he dominates any room he walks into, but sometimes, like that afternoon, I saw another side to him that I didn't really understand. He kept looking over his shoulder like we were being hunted. "Dad?" I said as we were getting off the A40. "What's wrong?" "No sign of them," he muttered. Then he must have realized he'd spoken aloud, because he looked at me kind of startled. "Nothing, Carter. Everything's fine." Which bothered me because my dad's a terrible liar. I always knew when he was hiding something, but I also knew no amount of pestering would get the truth out of him. He was probably trying to protect me, though from what, I didn't know. Sometimes I wondered if he had some dark secret in his past, some old enemy following him maybe. But the idea seemed ridiculous. Dad was just an archaeologist. The other thing that troubled me? Dad was clutching his work bag. Usually when he does that, it means we're in danger. Like the time gunmen stormed our hotel in Cairo. I heard shots coming from the lobby and ran downstairs to check on my dad. By the time I got there, he was just calmly zipping up his work bag while 3 unconscious gunmen hung by their feet from the chandelier, their robes falling over their heads so you could see their boxer shorts. Dad claimed not to have witnessed anything, and in the end, the police blamed a freak chandelier malfunction. Another time, we got caught in a riot in Paris. My dad found the nearest parked car, pushed me into the back seat, and told me to stay down. I pressed myself against the floorboards and kept my eyes shut tight. I could hear Dad in the driver's seat, rummaging in his bag, mumbling something to himself while the mob yelled and destroyed things outside. A few minutes later, he told me it was safe to get up. Every other car on the block had been overturned and set on fire. Our car had been freshly washed and polished, and several 20-euro notes had been tucked under the windshield wipers. Anyway, I'd come to respect the bag. It was our good luck charm. But when my dad kept it close, it meant we were going to need good luck. We drove through the city center, heading east toward my grandparents' flat. We passed the golden gates of Buckingham Palace, the big stone column at Trafalgar Square. London is a pretty cool place, but after you've traveled for so long, all cities start to blend together. Other kids I meet sometimes say, "Wow, you're so lucky you get to travel so much." But it's not like we spend our time sightseeing or have a lot of money to travel in style. We've stayed in some pretty rough places, and we hardly ever stay anywhere longer than a few days. Most of the time, it feels like we're fugitives rather than tourists. I mean, you wouldn't think my dad's work was dangerous. He does lectures on topics like, "Can Egyptian magic really kill you?" and favorite punishments in the Egyptian underworld, and other stuff most people wouldn't care about. But like I said, there's that other side to him. He's always very cautious, checking every hotel room before he lets me walk into it. He'll dart into a museum to see some artifacts, take a few notes, and rush out again like he's afraid to be caught on the security cameras. One time when I was younger, we raced across the Charles de Gaulle airport to catch a last-minute flight, and Dad didn't relax until the plane was off the ground. I asked him point blank what he was running from, and he looked at me like I just pulled the pin out of a grenade. For a second, I was scared he might actually tell me the truth. Then he said, "Carter, it's nothing." As if nothing were the most terrible thing in the world. After that, I decided maybe it was better not to ask questions. My grandparents, the Fausts, live in a housing development near Canary Wharf, right on the banks of the River Thames. The taxi let us off at the curb, and my dad asked the driver to wait. We were halfway up the walk when Dad froze. He turned and looked behind us. What? I asked. Then I saw the man in the trench coat. He was across the street, leaning against a big, dead tree. He was barrel-shaped, with skin the color of roasted coffee. His coat and black pinstriped suit looked expensive. He had long braided hair and wore a black fedora pulled down low over his dark round glasses. He reminded me of a jazz musician, the kind my dad would always drag me to see in concert. Even though I couldn't see his eyes, I got the impression he was watching us. He might have been an old friend or colleague of Dad's. No matter where we went, Dad was always running into people he knew. But it did seem strange that the guy was waiting here, outside my grandparents'. And he didn't look happy. "Carter," my dad said, "go on ahead, but get your sister. I'll meet you back at the taxi." He crossed the street toward the man in the trench coat, which left me with two choices: follow my dad and see what was going on, or do what I was told. I decided on the slightly less dangerous path. I went to retrieve my sister. Before I could even knock, Sadie opened the door. "Late as usual," she said. She was holding her cat, Muffin, who'd been a going-away gift from Dad 6 years before. Muffin never seemed to get older or bigger. She had fuzzy yellow and black fur like a miniature leopard, alert yellow eyes, and pointy ears that were too tall for her head. A silver Egyptian pendant dangled from her collar. She didn't look anything like a muffin, but Sadie had been little when she named her, so I guess you have to cut her some slack. Sadie hadn't changed much either since last summer. As I'm recording this, she's standing next to me, glaring, so I'd better be careful how I describe her. You would never guess she's my sister. First of all, she'd been living in England so long, she has a British accent. Second, she takes after our mom, who was white, so Sadie's skin is much lighter than mine. She has straight caramel-colored hair, not exactly blonde, but not brown, which she usually dyes with streaks of bright colors. That day it had red streaks down the left side. Her eyes are blue. I'm serious. Blue eyes, just like our mom's. She's only 12, but she's exactly as tall as me, which is really annoying. She was chewing gum, as usual, dressed for her day out with Dad in battered jeans, a leather jacket, and combat boots, like she was going to a concert and was hoping to stomp on some people. She had headphones dangling around her neck, in case we bored her. Okay, she didn't hit me, so I guess I did an okay job of describing her. Our plane was late, I told her. She popped a bubble, rubbed Muffin's head, and tossed the cat inside. "Gran, going out!" From somewhere in the house, Grandma Faust said something I couldn't make out, probably, "Don't let them in!" Sadie closed the door and regarded me as if I were a dead mouse her cat had just dragged in. "So, here you are again." "Yep." "Come on, then," she sighed. "Let's get on with it." That's the way she was. No, "Hi, how you been the last 6 months? So glad to see you," or anything. But that was okay with me. When you only see each other twice a year, it's like you're distant cousins rather than siblings. We had absolutely nothing in common except our parents. We trudged down the steps. I was thinking how she smelled like a combination of old people's house and bubblegum when she stopped so abruptly I ran into her. "Who's that?" she asked. I'd almost forgotten about the dude in the trench coat. He and my dad were standing across the street next to the big tree, having what looked like a serious argument. Dad's back was turned, so I couldn't see his face, but he gestured with his hands like he does when he's agitated. The other guy scowled and shook his head. "Dunno," I said. "He was there when we pulled up." "He looks familiar." Sadie frowned like she was trying to remember. "Come on." "Dad wants us to wait in the cab," I said, even though I knew it was no use. Sadie was already on the move. Instead of going straight across the street, she dashed up the sidewalk for half a block, ducking behind cars, then crossed to the opposite side and crouched under a low stone wall. She started sneaking toward our dad. I didn't have much choice but to follow her example, even though it made me feel kind of stupid. 6 years in England. I muttered, and she thinks she's James Bond. Sadie swatted me without looking back and kept creeping forward. A couple more steps, and we were right behind the big dead tree. I could hear my dad on the other side saying, "Have to, Amos. You know it's the right thing." "No," said the other man, who must have been Amos. His voice was deep and even, very insistent. His accent was American. "If I don't stop you, Julius, they will. The Père Ankh is shadowing you." Sadie turned to me and mouthed the words, "Père what?" I shook my head, just as mystified. "Let's get out of here."
19. A picnic in the sky. Right, Carter, give me the mic. So, I'd been to the Louvre once before on holiday, but I hadn't been chased by vicious fruit bats. I would have been terrified, except I was too busy being angry with Carter. I couldn't believe the way he'd treated my bird problem. Honestly, I thought I would be a kite forever, suffocating inside a little feathery prison, and he had the nerve to make fun. I promised myself I'd get revenge, but for the time being we had enough worries staying alive. We raced along in the cold rain. It was all I could do to avoid slipping on the slick pavements. I glanced back and saw two figures chasing us, men with shaved heads and goatees and black raincoats. They might have passed for normal mortals, except they each carried a glowing staff. Not a good sign. The bats were literally at our heels. One nipped my leg, another buzzed my hair. I had to force myself to keep running. My stomach still felt queasy from eating one of the little pests when I was a kite. And no, that had not been my idea. Totally a defensive instinct. "Sadie," Bast called as we ran, "you'll have only seconds to open the portal." "Where is it?" I yelled. We dashed across the Rue de Rivoli into a wide plaza surrounded by the wings of the Louvre. Bast made straight for the glass pyramid at the entrance, glowing in the dusk. "You can't be serious," I said. "That isn't a real pyramid." "Of course it's real," Bast said. "The shape gives a pyramid its power. It is a ramp to the heavens." The bats were all around us now, biting our arms, flying around our feet. As their numbers increased, it got harder to see or move. Carter reached for his sword, then apparently remembered it wasn't there anymore. He'd lost it at Luxor. He swore and rummaged around in his work bag. "Don't slow down," Bast warned. Carter pulled out his wand. In total frustration, he threw it at a bat. I thought this a pointless gesture, but the wand glowed white-hot and thumped the bat solidly on the head, knocking it out of the air. The wand ricocheted through the swarm, thumping 6, 7, 8 of the little monsters before returning to Carter's hand. "Not bad," I said. "Keep it up." We arrived at the base of the pyramid. The plaza was thankfully empty. The last thing I wanted was my embarrassing death by fruit bats posted on YouTube. 1 minute until sundown, Bast warned. "Our last chance for summoning is now." She unsheathed her knives and started slicing bats out of the air, trying to keep them away from me. Carter's wand flew wildly, knocking fruit bats every which way. I faced the pyramid and tried to think of a portal, the way I'd done at Luxor, but it was almost impossible to concentrate. "Where do you wish to go?" Isis said in my mind. "God, I don't care. America." I realized I was crying. I hated to, but shock and fear were starting to overwhelm me. Where did I want to go? Home, of course. Back to my flat in London. Back to my own room, my grandparents, my mates at school, and my old life. But I couldn't. I had to think about my father and our mission. We had to get to Set. "America," I thought. "No!" My burst of emotion must have had some effect. The pyramid trembled. Its glass walls shimmered, and the top of the structure began to glow. A swirling sand vortex appeared, all right. Only one problem. It was hovering above the very top of the pyramid. "Climb," Bast said. Easy for her. She was a cat. "The side is too steep," Carter objected. He'd done a good job with the bats. Dazed heaps littered the pavement, but more still flew around us, biting every bit of exposed skin, and the magicians were closing in. "I'll toss you," Bast said. "Excuse me?" Carter protested, but she picked him up by his collar and tossed him up the side of the pyramid. He skidded to the top in a very undignified manner and slipped straight through the portal. "Now you, Sadie," Bast said. "Come on." Before I could move, a man's voice yelled, "Stop!" Stupidly, I froze. The voice was so powerful it was hard not to. The two magicians were approaching. The taller one spoke in perfect English. "Surrender, Miss Kane, and return our master's property." "Sadie, don't listen," Bast warned. "Come here." "The cat goddess deceives you," the magician said. "She abandoned her post. She endangered us all. She will lead you to ruin." I could tell he meant it. He was absolutely convinced of what he said. I turned to Bast. Her expression had changed. She looked wounded, even grief-stricken. "What does he mean?" I said. "What did you do wrong?" "We have to leave," she warned, "or they will kill us." I looked at the portal. Carter was already through. That decided it. I wasn't going to be separated from him. As annoying as he was, Carter was the only person I had left. How is that for depressing? "Toss me," I said. Bast grabbed me. "See you in America." Then she chucked me up the side of the pyramid. I heard the magician roar, "Surrender!" and an explosion rattled the glass next to my head. Then I plunged into the hot vortex of sand. I woke in a small room with industrial carpeting, grey walls, and metal-framed windows. I felt as if I were inside a high-tech refrigerator. I sat up groggily and discovered I was coated in cold, wet sand. "Ugh," I said. "Where are we?" Carter and Bast stood by the window. Apparently they'd been conscious for a while because they'd both brushed themselves off. "You've got to see this view," Carter said. I got shakily to my feet and nearly fell down again when I saw how high we were. An entire city spread out below us. I mean, far below, well over 100 meters. I could almost believe we were still in Paris, because a river curved off to our left, and the land was mostly flat. There were white government buildings clustered around networks of parks and circular roads, all spread out under a winter sky. But the light was wrong. It was still afternoon here, so we must have travelled west. And as my eyes made their way to the other end of a long rectangular green space, I found myself staring at a mansion that looked oddly familiar. "Is that the White House?" Carter nodded. "You got us to America, all right. Washington, D.C. But we're sky high." Bast chuckled.
Washington,
"You didn't
D.C.
specify any particular American city, did you?" "Well, no." "So you got the default portal for the U.S., the largest single source of Egyptian power in North America." I stared at her uncomprehendingly. "The biggest obelisk ever constructed," she said. "The Washington Monument." I had another moment of vertigo and moved away from the window. Carter grabbed my shoulder and helped me sit down. "You should rest," he said. "You passed out for... how long, Bast?" 2 hours and 32 minutes, she said. "I'm sorry, Sadie. Opening more than one portal a day is extremely taxing, even with ISIS helping." Carter frowned. "But we need her to do it again, right?" "It's not sunset here yet. We can still use portals. Let's open one and get to Arizona. That's where Set is." Bast pursed her lips. "Sadie can't summon another portal. It would overextend her powers. I don't have the talent, and you, Carter, well, your abilities lie elsewhere. No offense." "Oh no," he grumbled. "I'm sure you'll call me next time you need to boomerang some fruit bats." "Besides," Bast said, "when a portal is used, it needs time to cool down. No one will be able to use the Washington Monument for another 12 hours, Carter cursed. "I forgot about that." Bast nodded. "And by then, the demon days will have begun." "So we need another way to Arizona," Carter said. I suppose he didn't make me feel guilty, but I did. I hadn't thought things through, and now we were stuck in Washington. I glanced at Bast out of the corner of my eye. I wanted to ask her what the men at the Louvre had meant about her leading us to ruin, but I was afraid to. I wanted to believe she was on our side. Perhaps if I gave her a chance, she'd volunteer the information. At least those magicians can't follow us, I prompted. Bast hesitated. Not through the portal, no. But there are other magicians in America. And worse, Set's minions. My heart climbed into my throat. The House of Life was scary enough, but when I remembered Set and what his minions had done to Amos's house... What about Toth's spellbook? I said. Did we at least find a way to fight Set? Carter pointed to the corner of the room. Spread out on Bast's raincoat was Dad's magic toolbox and the blue book we'd stolen from Desjardins. Maybe you can make sense of it, Carter said.
Oh, that's how they
couldn't read it.
That's how they
Even
pronounce
Doughboy
it.
was stumped.
Desjardins.
I picked up the book, which was actually a scroll folded into sections. The papyrus was so brittle I was afraid to touch it. Hieroglyphs and illustrations crowded the page, but I couldn't make sense of them. My ability to read the language seemed to be switched off. Isis? I asked. A little help? Her voice was silent. Maybe I'd worn her out. Or maybe she was cross with me for not letting her take over my body the way Horace had asked Carter to do. Selfish of me, I know. I closed the book in frustration. All that work for nothing. Now, Bast said. It's not so bad. Right, I said. We're stuck in Washington, D.C. We have 2 days to make it to Arizona and stop a god we don't know how to stop. And if we can't, we'll never see our dad or Amos again, and the world might end. That's the spirit, Bast said brightly. Now, let's have a picnic. She snapped her fingers, the air shimmered, and a pile of Friskies cans and 2 jugs of milk appeared on the carpet. Carter said, can you conjure any people food? Bast blinked. Well, no accounting for taste. The air shimmered again. A plate of grilled cheese sandwiches and crisps appeared, along with a 6-pack of Coke. Yum, I said. Carter muttered something under his breath. I suppose grilled cheese wasn't his favorite, but he picked up a sandwich. We should leave soon, he said between bites. I mean, tourists and all. Bast shook her head. The Washington Monument closes at 6 o'clock. The tourists are gone now. We might as well stay the night. If we must travel during the demon days, best to do it in daylight hours. We all must have been exhausted, because we didn't talk again until we'd finished our food. I ate 3 sandwiches and drank 2 Cokes. Bast made the whole place smell like fish Friskies, then started licking her hand as if preparing for a cat bath. Could you not do that? I asked. It's disturbing. Oh, she smiled. Sorry. I closed my eyes and leaned against the wall. It felt good to rest, but I realized the room wasn't actually quiet. The entire building seemed to be humming ever so slightly, sending a tremble through my skull that made my teeth buzz. I opened my eyes and sat up. I could still feel it. What is that? I asked. The wind? Magic energy, Bast said. I told you, this is a powerful monument. But it's modern, like the Louvre Pyramid. Why is it magic? The ancient Egyptians were excellent builders, Sadie. They picked shapes, obelisks, pyramids, that were charged with symbolic magic. An obelisk represents a sunbeam frozen in stone, a life-giving ray from the original king of the gods, Ra. It doesn't matter when the structure was built. It is still Egyptian. That's why any obelisk can be used for opening gates to the Duat or releasing great beings of power. Or trapping them, I said, the way you were trapped in Cleopatra's Needle. Her expression darkened. I wasn't actually trapped in the obelisk. My prison was a magically created abyss deep in the Duat, and the obelisk was the door your parents used to release me. But yes, all symbols of Egypt are concentrated nodes of magic power, so an obelisk can definitely be used to imprison gods. An idea was nagging at the back of my mind, but I couldn't quite pin it down. Something about my mother and Cleopatra's Needle and my father's last promise in the British Museum. I'll put things right. Then I thought back to the Louvre and the comment the magician had made. Bast looked so cross at the moment I was almost afraid to ask, but it was the only way I'd get an answer. The magician said you abandoned your post. What did he mean? Carter frowned. When was this? I told him what had happened after Bast chucked him through the portal. Bast stacked her empty Friskies cans. She didn't look eager to reply. When I was imprisoned, she said at last, I wasn't alone. I was locked inside with a creature of chaos. Is that bad? I asked. Judging from Bast's expression, the answer was yes. Magicians often do this. Lock a god up together with a monster, so we have no time to try escaping our prison. For eons, I fought this monster. When your parents released me, the monster got out? Bast hesitated a little too long for my taste. No, my enemy couldn't have escaped. She took a deep breath. Your mother's final act of magic sealed that gate. The enemy was still inside, but that's what the magician meant. As far as he was concerned, my post was battling that monster forever. It had the ring of truth, as if she was sharing a painful memory, but it didn't explain the other bit the magician had said. She endangered us all. I was getting up the nerve to ask exactly what the monster had been when Bast stood up. I should go scout, she said abruptly. I'll be back. We listened to her footsteps echo down the stairwell. She's hiding something, Carter said. Work that out yourself, did you? I asked. He looked away, and immediately I felt bad. I'm sorry, I said. It's just... What are we going to do? Rescue Dad. What else can we do? He picked up his wand and turned it in his fingers. Do you think he really meant to, bring Mom back? I wanted to say yes. More than anything, I wanted to believe that was possible. But I found myself shaking my head. Something about it didn't seem right. Iskandar told me something about Mum, I said. She was a diviner. She could see the future. He said she made him rethink some old ideas. It was my first chance to tell Carter about my conversation with the old magician, so I gave him the details. Carter knit his eyebrows. You think that has something to do with why Mom died? She saw something in the future? I don't know. I tried to think back to when I was 6, but my memory was frustratingly fuzzy. When they took us to England the last time, did she and Dad seem like they were in a hurry? Like they were doing something really important? Definitely. Would you say freeing Bast was really important? I mean, I love her, of course, but worth dying for important? Carter hesitated. Probably not. Well, there you are. I think Dad and Mum were up to something bigger, something they didn't complete. Possibly that's what Dad was after at the British Museum, completing the task, whatever it was, making things right. And this whole business about our family going back 1 billion years to some god-hosting pharaohs, why didn't anyone tell us? Why didn't Dad? Carter didn't answer for a long time. Maybe Dad was protecting us, he said. The House of Life doesn't trust our family, especially after what Dad and Mom did. Amos said we were raised apart for a reason, so we wouldn't, trigger each other's magic. Bloody awful reason to keep us apart, I muttered. Carter looked at me strangely, and I realized what I'd said might have been construed as a compliment. I just mean they should have been honest, I rushed on. Not that I wanted more time with my annoying brother, of course. He nodded seriously. Of course. We sat listening to the magic hum of the obelisk. I tried to remember the last time Carter and I had simply spent time like this together, talking. Is your, I tapped the side of my head. Your friend being any help? Not much, he admitted. Yours? I shook my head. Carter, are you scared? A little. He dug his wand into the carpet. No, a lot. I looked at the blue book we'd stolen, pages full of wonderful secrets I couldn't read. What if we can't do it? I don't know, he said. That book about mastering the element of cheese would have been more helpful. Or summoning fruit bats. Please, not the fruit bats. He shared a weary smile, and it felt rather good, but it changed nothing.
Please,
he was
not
still
the
in
fruit
serious
bats.
trouble with no clear plan. Why don't you sleep on it? He suggested. You used a lot of energy today. I'll keep watch until Bast gets back. He actually sounded concerned for me. How cute. I didn't want to sleep. I didn't want to miss anything.
Cute.
But I realized my eyelids were incredibly heavy. All right then, I said. Don't let the bed bugs bite. I lay down to sleep, but my soul, my bar, had other ideas. 20. I visit the star-spangled goddess. I hadn't realized how unsettling it would be. Carter had explained how his bar left his body while he slept, but having it happen to me was another thing altogether. It was much worse than my vision in the Hall of Ages. There I was, floating in the air as a glowing bird-like spirit, and there was my body below me, fast asleep. Just trying to describe it gives me a headache. My first thought as I gazed down on my sleeping form, God, I look awful. Bad enough looking in a mirror or seeing pictures of myself on my friends' web pages. Seeing myself in person was simply wrong. My hair was a rat's nest, the linen pajamas were not in the least flattering, and the spot on my chin was enormous. My second thought as I examined the strange shimmering form of my bar, this won't do at all. I didn't care if I was invisible to the mortal eye or not. After my bad experience as a kite, I simply refused to go about as a glowing, sadie-headed chicken. That's fine for Carter, but I have standards. I could feel the currents of the duat tugging at me, trying to pull my bar to wherever souls go when they have visions, but I wasn't ready. I concentrated hard and imagined my normal appearance. Well, all right, perhaps my appearance as I'd like it to be, a bit better than normal, and voila! My bar morphed into a human form, still see-through and glowing, mind you, but more like a proper ghost. Well, at least that's sorted, I thought, and I allowed the currents to sweep me away. The world melted to black. At first, I was nowhere, just a dark void. Then a young man stepped out of the shadows. You again, he said. I stammered. Honestly, you know me well enough by now. That's not like me. But this was the boy I'd seen in my Hall of Ages vision. The very handsome boy with the black robes and tousled hair. His dark brown eyes had the most unnerving effect on me, and I was very glad I'd changed out of my glowing chicken outfit. I tried again and managed 3 entire words. What are you doing here? He said, gallantly finishing my sentence. Spirit travel and death are very similar. Not sure what that means, I said. Should I be worried? He tilted his head as if considering the question. Not this trip. She only wants to talk to you. Go ahead. He waved his hand, and a doorway opened in the darkness. I was pulled towards it. See you again? I asked, but the boy was gone. I found myself standing in a luxury flat in the middle of the sky. It had no walls, no ceiling, and a see-through floor looking straight down at city lights from the height of an airplane. Clouds drifted below my feet. The air should have been freezing cold and too thin to breathe, but I felt warm and comfortable. Black leather sofas made a U round a glass coffee table on a blood-red rug. A fire burned in a slate fireplace. Bookshelves and paintings hovered in the air where the walls should have been. A black granite bar stood in the corner, and in the shadows behind it, a woman was making tea. "Hello, my child," she said. She stepped into the light, and I gasped. She wore an Egyptian kilt from the waist down. From the waist up, she wore only a bikini top. And her skin was dark blue, covered with stars. I don't mean painted stars. She had the entire cosmos living on her skin. Gleaming constellations, galaxies too bright to look at, glowing nebulae of pink and blue dust. Her features seemed to disappear into the stars that shifted across her face. Her hair was long and as black as midnight. "You're the nut," I said. Then I realized maybe that had come out wrong. "I mean, the sky goddess." The goddess smiled. Her bright white teeth were like a new galaxy bursting into existence. "Nut is fine. And believe me, I've heard all the jokes about my name." She poured a second cup from her teapot. "Look, care for some salad?" It's not tea?" "No, an Egyptian drink. You've heard of hot chocolate? This is rather like hot vanilla."
Hot vanilla.
I would have preferred tea, as I hadn't had a proper cup in ages, but I supposed one didn't turn down a goddess. Yeah, thanks." We sat together on the sofa. To my surprise, my glowing, spirity hands had no trouble holding a teacup, and I could drink quite easily. The salad was sweet and tasty, with just a hint of cinnamon and coconut. It warmed me up nicely and filled the air with the smell of vanilla. For the first time in days, I felt safe. Then I remembered I was only here in spirit. Nut set down her cup. "I suppose you're wondering why I brought you here." "Where exactly is here? And, who's your doorman?" I hoped she'd drop some information about the boy in black, but she only smiled. "I must keep my secrets, dear. I can't have the House of Life trying to find me. Let's just say I built this home with a nice city view." "Is that..." I gestured to her starry blue skin. Are you inside a human host?" "No, dear. The sky itself is my body. This is merely a manifestation." "But I thought..." "Gods need a physical host outside the duat. It's somewhat easier for me, being a spirit of the air. I was one of the few gods who was never imprisoned, because the House of Life could never catch me. I'm used to being free form." Suddenly, Nut and the entire apartment flickered. I felt like I would drop through the floor. Then the sofa became stable again. "Please don't do that again," I begged. "My apologies," Nut said. "The point is, each god is different, but all my brethren are free now, all finding places in this modern world of yours. They won't be imprisoned again." "The magicians won't like that." "No," Nut agreed. "That's the first reason you are here. A battle between the gods and the House of Life would serve only chaos. You must make the magicians understand this." "They won't listen to me. They think I'm a godling." "You are a godling, dear." She touched my hair gently, and I felt Isis stirring within me, struggling to speak using my voice. "I'm Sadie Kane," I said. "I didn't ask for Isis to hitch a ride." "The gods have known your family for generations, Sadie. In the olden days, we worked together for the benefit of Egypt. The magicians said that gods caused the fall of the Empire. That is a long and pointless debate, Nut said, and I could hear an edge of anger in her voice. All empires fall, but the idea of Egypt is eternal. The triumph of civilization, the forces of Ma'at overcoming the forces of chaos. That battle is fought generation after generation. Now, it's your turn. I know, I said. We have to defeat Set. But is it that simple, Sadie? Set is my son, too. In the old days, he was Ra's strongest lieutenant. He protected the sun god's boat from the serpent Apophis. Now there was evil. Apophis was the embodiment of chaos. He hated creation from the moment the first mountain appeared out of the sea. He hated the gods, mortals, and everything they built. And yet Set fought against him. Set was one of us. Then he turned evil? Nut shrugged. Set has always been Set, for better or worse. But he is still part of our family. It is difficult to lose any member of your family, is it not? My throat tightened. That's hardly fair. Don't speak to me of fairness, Nut said. For 5,000 years, I have been kept apart from my husband, Geb. I vaguely remembered Carter saying something about this, but it seemed different listening to her now, hearing the pain in her voice. What happened? I asked. Punishment for bearing my children, she said bitterly. I disobeyed Ra's wishes, and so he ordered my own father, Shu. Hang on, I said. Shu? S-H-U, she said. The god of the wind. Oh. I wish these gods had names that weren't common household objects. Go on, please. Ra ordered my father, Shu, to keep us apart forever. I am exiled to the sky, while my beloved Geb cannot leave the ground. What happens if you try? Nut closed her eyes and spread her hands. A hole opened where she was sitting, and she fell through the air. Instantly, the clouds below us flickered with lightning. Winds raged across the flat, throwing books off the shelves, ripping away paintings and flinging them into the void. My teacup leaped out of my hand. I grabbed the sofa to avoid getting blown away myself. Below me, lightning struck Nut's form. The wind pushed her violently upward, shooting past me. Then the winds died. Nut settled back onto the couch. She waved her hand and the flat repaired itself. Everything returned to normal. That happens, she said sadly. Oh. She gazed at the city lights far below. It has given me appreciation for my children, even Set. He has done horrible things, yet it is his nature. But he is still my son, and still one of the gods. He acts his part. Perhaps the way to defeat him is not the way you would imagine. Hints, please? Seek out Toth. He has found a new home in Memphis. Memphis, Egypt? Nut smiled. Memphis, Tennessee. Although the old bird probably thinks it
Memphis,
is
Egypt?
He so rarely takes his beak out of his books. I doubt he would know the difference. You will find him there. He can advise you. Be wary, though. Toth often asks for favors. He is sometimes hard to predict. Getting used to that, I said. How are we supposed to get there? I am goddess of the sky. I can guarantee you safe travel as far as Memphis. She waved her hand, and a folder appeared in my lap. Inside were 3 plane tickets, Washington to Memphis, first class. I raised my eyebrow. I suppose you get a lot of frequent flyer miles? Something like that, Nut agreed. But as you get closer to Set, you will be beyond my help. And I cannot protect you on the ground. Which reminds me, you need to wake up soon. Set's minion is closing in on your hideout. I sat up straight. How soon? Minutes. Send my spirit back then. I pinched my ghostly arm, which hurt just like it would on my normal arm, but nothing happened. Soon, Sadie, Nut promised. But 2 more things you must know. I had 5 children during the demon days. If your father released all of them, you should consider, where is the 5th? I racked my brain, trying to remember the names of all of Nut's 5 children. Bit difficult without my brother, the human Wikipedia, around to keep track of such trivia for me. There was Osiris, the king, and Isis, his queen, Set, the evil god, and Horus, the avenger. But the 5th child of Nut, the one Carter said he could never remember. Then I recalled my vision in the Hall of Ages, Osiris's birthday, and the woman in blue who'd help Isis escape Set. You mean Nephthys, Set's wife? Consider it, Nut said again. And lastly, a favor. She opened her hand and produced an envelope sealed with red wax. If you see Geb, will you give him this? I'd been asked to pass notes before, but never between gods. Honestly, Nut's anguished expression was no different than those of my love-struck friends back at school. I wondered if she'd ever written on her notebook, Geb plus Nut equals true love, or Mrs. Geb. Least I can do, I promised. Now, about sending me back? Safe travels, Sadie, the goddess said. And Isis, restrain yourself. The spirit of Isis rumbled inside me, as if I'd eaten a bad curry. Wait, I said. What do you mean, restrain? Before I could finish, my vision went black. I snapped awake, back in my own body, at the Washington Monument. Leave now! Carter and Bast jumped in surprise. They were already awake, packing their things. What's wrong? Carter asked. I told them about my vision while I frantically searched my pockets. Nothing. I checked my magician's bag. Tucked inside with my wand and rod were 3 plane tickets and a sealed envelope. Bast examined the tickets. Excellent. First class serves salmon. But what about Set's minion? I asked. Carter glanced out the window. His eyes widened. Yeah, it's here.
21. Aunt Kitty to the rescue. I'd seen pictures of the creature before, but pictures didn't come close to capturing how horrible it was in real life. The Set animal, Bast said, confirming my fear. Far below, the creature prowled the base of the monument, leaving tracks in the new fallen snow. I had trouble judging its size, but it must have been at least as big as a horse, with legs just as long. It had an unnaturally lean, muscled body with shiny reddish-gray fur. You could almost mistake it for a huge greyhound, except for the tail and the head. The tail was reptilian, forked at the end with triangular points, like squid tentacles. It lashed around as if it had a mind of its own. The creature's head was the strangest part. Its oversized ears stuck straight up like rabbit ears, but they were shaped more like ice cream cones, curled inward and wider on the top than the bottom. They could rotate almost 360 degrees so they could hear anything. The creature's snout was long and curved like an anteater's. Only anteaters don't have razor-sharp teeth. Its eyes are glowing, I said. That can't be good. How can you see that far? Sadie demanded. She stood next to me, squinting at the tiny figure in the snow, and I realized she had a point. The animal was at least 500 feet below us. How was I able to see its eyes? You still have the sight of the falcon, Bast guessed. And you're right, Carter. The glowing eyes mean the creature has caught our scent. I looked at her and almost jumped out of my skin. Her hair was sticking straight up all over her head, like she'd stuck her finger in a light socket. Bast? I asked. What? Sadie and I exchanged looks. She mouthed the word, scared. Then I remembered how Muffin's tail would always poof up when something startled her. Nothing, I said. Though if the set animal was so dangerous that it gave our goddess light socket hair, that had to be a very bad sign. How do we get out of here? You don't understand, Bast said. The set animal is the perfect hunter. If it has our scent, there's no stopping it.
What?
Why is it called the set
Makan?
animal? Sadie
No.
asked nervously.
Thank you.
Doesn't it have a name? If it did, Bast said, you would not want to speak it. It is merely known as the set animal. The Red Lord's symbolic creature. It shares his strength, cunning, and his evil nature. Lovely, Sadie said. The animal sniffed at the monument and recoiled, snarling. It doesn't seem to like the obelisk, I noticed. No, Bast said. Too much Mart energy. But that won't hold it back for long. As if on cue, the set animal leaped onto the side of the monument. It began climbing like a lion scaling a tree, digging its claws into the stone. Well, that's messed up, I said. Elevator or stairs? Both are too slow, Bast said. Back away from the window. She unsheathed her knives and sliced through the glass. She punched out the window, setting off alarm bells. Freezing air blasted into the observation room. You'll need to fly, Bast yelled over the wind. It's the only way. No. Sadie's face went pale. Not the kite again. Sadie, it's okay, I said. She shook her head, terrified. I grabbed her hand. I'll stay with you. I'll make sure you turn back. The set animal is halfway up, Bast warned. We're running out of time. Sadie glanced at Bast. What about you? You can't fly. I'll jump, she said. Cats always land on their feet. It's over 100 meters, Sadie cried. 170, Bast said. I'll distract the set animal. Buy you some time.
170, fuck this
You'll
shit.
be killed. Sadie's voice sounded close to breaking. Please, I can't lose you too. Bast looked a little surprised. Then she smiled and put her hand on Sadie's shoulder. I'll be fine, dear. Meet me at Reagan National Terminal A. Be ready to run. Before I could argue, Bast jumped out the window. My heart just about stopped. She plummeted straight toward the pavement. I was sure she'd die, but as she fell, she spread her arms and legs and seemed to relax. She hurtled straight past the set animal, which let out a horrible scream like a wounded man on a battlefield, then turned and leaped after her. Bast hit the ground with both feet and took off running. She must have been doing 60 miles an hour, easy. The set animal wasn't as agile. It crashed so hard, the pavement cracked. It stumbled for a few steps, but didn't appear hurt. Then it loped after Bast and was soon gaining on her. She won't make it, Sadie fretted. Never bet against a cat, I said. We've got to do our part. Ready? She took a deep breath. All right, before I change my mind. Instantly, a black-winged kite appeared in front of me, flapping its wings to keep its balance in the intense wind. I willed myself to become a falcon. It was even easier than before. A moment later, we soared into the cold morning air over Washington, D.C. Finding the airport was easy. Reagan National was so close I could see the planes landing across the Potomac. The hard part was remembering what I was doing. Every time I saw a mouse or a squirrel, I instinctively veered toward it. A couple of times I caught myself about to dive, and I had to fight the urge. Once I looked over and realized I was a mile away from Sadie, who was off doing her own hunting. I had to force myself to fly next to her and get her attention. It takes willpower to stay human, the voice of Horus warned. The more time you spend as a bird of prey, the more you think like one. Now you tell me, I thought. I could help, he urged. Give me control. Not today, birdhead. Finally, I steered Sadie toward the airport, and we started hunting for a place to change back to human form. We landed at the top of a parking garage. I willed myself to turn human. Nothing happened. Panic started building in my throat. I closed my eyes and pictured my dad's face. I thought about how much I missed him, how much I needed to find him. When I opened my eyes, I was back to normal. Unfortunately, Sadie was still a kite. She flapped around me and cawed frantically. Ha! 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 There was a wild look in her eyes, and this time I understood how scared she was. Bird form had been hard enough for her to break out of the first time. If the second time took even more energy, she could be in serious trouble. It's all right. I crouched down, careful to move slowly. Sadie, don't force it. You have to relax. Ha! She tucked in her wings. Her chest was heaving. Listen, it helped me to focus on Dad. Remember what's important to you. Close your eyes and think about your human life. She closed her eyes, but almost instantly cried out in frustration and flapped her wings. Stop, I said. Don't fly away. She tilted her head and gurgled in a pleading way. I started talking to her the way I would to a scared animal. I wasn't really paying attention to the words. I was just trying to keep my tone calm. But after a minute, I realized I was telling her about my travels with Dad and the memories that had helped me get out of bird form. I told her about the time Dad and I got stuck in the Venice airport and I ate so many cannoli I got sick. I told her about the time in Egypt when I found the scorpion in my sock and Dad managed to kill it with a TV remote control. I told her how we'd gotten separated once in the London Underground and how scared I was until Dad finally found me. I told her some pretty embarrassing stories that I'd never shared with anyone, because who could I share them with? And it seemed to me that Sadie listened. At least she stopped flapping her wings. Her breathing slowed, she became very still, and her eyes didn't look so panicked. Okay, Sadie, I said at last. I've got an idea. Here's what we're going to do. I took Dad's magic box out of its leather bag. I wrapped the bag around my forearm and tied it with the straps as best I could. Hop on. Sadie flew up and perched at my wrist. Even with my makeshift arm guard, her sharp talons dug into my skin. We'll get you out of this, I said. Keep trying, relax, and focus on your human life. You'll figure it out, Sadie. I know you will. I'll carry you until then. Ha! Come on, I said. Let's find Bast. With my sister perched on my arm, I walked to the elevator. A businessman with a rolling suitcase was waiting by the doors. His eyes widened when he saw me. I must have looked pretty strange. A tall black kid in dirty, ragged Egyptian clothes with a weird box tucked under one arm and a bird of prey perched on the other. How's it going? I said. I'll take the stairs. He hurried off. The elevator took me to the ground level. Sadie and I crossed to the departures curb. I looked around desperately, hoping to see Bast, but instead I caught the attention of a curbside policeman. The guy frowned and started lumbering in my direction. Stay calm, I told Sadie. Resisting the urge to run, I turned and walked through the revolving doors. Here's the thing. I always get a little edgy around police. I remember when I was like 7 or 8 and still a cute little kid, it wasn't a problem. But as soon as I hit 11, I started to get the look, like, what's that kid doing here? Is he going to steal something? I mean, it's ridiculous, but it's a fact. I'm not saying it happens with every police officer, but when it doesn't happen, let's just say it's a pleasant surprise. This was not one of the pleasant times. I knew the cop was going to follow me, and I knew I had to act calm and walk like I had a purpose, which is not easy with a kite on your arm. Christmas vacation, so the airport was pretty full. Mostly families standing in line at the ticket counters, kids arguing and parents labeling luggage. I wondered what that would be like. A normal family trip? No magic problems or monsters chasing you? Stop it, I told myself. You've got work to do.
Lifeskilling to ako. Lifeskilling
I didn't know where to go.
Ginin eh.
Would Bast be inside security?
Gathering,
Outside?
fishing, hunting,
The
cooking,
crowds
alchemy.
parted as I walked through the
Semuanya
terminal.
bisa ngasilin
People
duit.
stared at Sadie. I knew I couldn't wander around looking lost.
Jadi ini game
It was only a
nggak
matter of
cuma
time before the
grinding doang.
cops. Young man. I turned. It was the police officer from outside. Sadie
Lifeskilling to
squawked,
misalnya
and the
gathering
cop
bisa
backed
buat
up,
jadi
resting his
potion,
hand on his nightstick.
jadi apa?
You can't
Food
have
buff
pets in
dan
here.
lain-lain, cooking
told
food
me.
buff,
I
alchemy
have tickets.
potion.
I tried to reach
processing
my pockets.
bikin-bikin
Then I
apa barang
remembered that
furnitur.
Bost had our tickets. The cop scowled. You better come with me. Suddenly, a woman's voice called, There you are, Carter. Bost was hurrying over, pushing her way through the crowd. I'd never been happier to see an Egyptian god in my life. Somehow, she'd managed to change clothes. She wore a rose-colored pantsuit, lots of gold jewelry, and a cashmere coat, so she looked like a wealthy businesswoman. Ignoring the cop, she sized up my appearance and wrinkled her nose. Carter, I told you not to wear those horrible falconry clothes. Honestly, you look like you've been sleeping in the wild. She took out a handkerchief and made a big production of wiping my face while the policeman stared. Ma'am, he finally managed. Is this your nephew? Bost lied. I'm so sorry, officer. We're heading to Memphis for a falconry competition. I hope he hasn't caused any problems. We're going to miss our flight. The falcon can't fly. Bost giggled. Well, of course it can fly, officer. It's a bird. His face reddened. I mean on a plane. Oh, we have the paperwork. To my amazement, she pulled out an envelope and handed it to the cop, along with our tickets. I see, the cop said. He looked our tickets over. You bought a first-class ticket for your falcon. It's a black kite, actually, Bost said. But yes, it's a very temperamental bird. A prize winner, you know. Give it a coach seat and try to offer it pretzels, and I won't be held responsible for the consequences. No, we always fly first class, don't we, Carter? Yeah, Aunt Kitty. She flashed me a look that said, I'll get you for that. Then she went back to smiling at the cop, who handed back our tickets and Sadie's paperwork. Well, if you'll excuse us, officer. That's a very handsome uniform, by the way. Do you work out? Before he could respond, Bost grabbed my arm and hurried me toward the security checkpoint. Don't look back, she said under her breath. As soon as we turned the corner, Bost pulled me aside by the vending machines. The set animal is close, she said. We've got a few minutes at best. What's wrong with Sadie? She can't, I stammered. I don't know exactly. Well, we'll have to figure it out on the plane. How did you change clothes? I asked. And the document for the bird? She waved her hand dismissively. Oh, mortal minds are weak. That document is an empty ticket sleeve. And my clothes haven't really changed. It's just a glamour. I looked at her more closely, and I saw she was right. Her new clothes flickered like a mirage over her usual leopard skin bodysuit. As soon as she pointed it out, the magic seemed flimsy and obvious. We'll try to make it to the gate before the set animal, she said. It will be easier if you stow your things in the duat. What? You don't really want to tote that box around under your arm, do you? Use the duat as a storage bin. How? Bost rolled her eyes. Honestly, what do they teach magicians these days? We had about 20 seconds of training. Just imagine a space in the air, like a shelf or a treasure chest. A locker? I asked. I've never had a school locker. Fine. Give it a combination lock, anything you want. Imagine opening the locker with your combination, then shove the box inside. When you need it again, just call it to mind, and it will appear. I was skeptical, but I imagined a locker. I gave it a combination, 13, 32, 33. Retired numbers for the Lakers, obviously. Chamberlain, Johnson, Abdul-Jabbar. I held out my dad's magic box and let it go, sure it would smash to the floor. Instead, the box disappeared. Cool, I said. Are you sure I can get it back? No, Bost said. Now come on.
This audiobook has been broken into multiple parts to make the...
over my head, but I wanted to remember. I'd always been irritated that Carter remembered Mum so much better than I did.
Mana sih? Fuck, bro.
Over my head, but I wanted to remember. I'd always been irritated that Carter remembered Mum so much better than I did. Sleep has different stages, Carter said. Like the first few hours, the brain is almost in a coma, a really deep sleep with hardly any dreams. Maybe that's why this part of the river is so dark and formless. Then later in the night, the brain goes through REM, rapid eye movement. That's when dreams happen. The cycles get more rapid and more vivid. Maybe the houses of the night follow a pattern like that. It seemed a bit far-fetched to me. Then again, Mum had always told us science and magic weren't mutually exclusive. She'd called them two dialects of the same language. Bast had once told us there were millions of different channels and tributaries to the Duart's River. The geography could change with each journey, responding to the traveller's thoughts. If the river was shaped by all the sleeping minds in the world, if its course got more vivid and crazy as the night went along, then we were in for a rough ride. The river eventually narrowed. A shoreline appeared on either side, black volcanic sand sparkling in the lights of our magic crew. The air turned colder. The underside of the boat scraped against rocks and sandbars, which made the leaks worse. Carter gave up on the pail and pulled wax from his supply bag. Together we tried to plug the leaks, speaking binding spells to hold the boat together. If I'd had any chewing gum, I would have used that as well. We didn't pass any signposts, now entering the third house, service's next exit, but we'd clearly entered a different section of the river. Time was slipping away at an alarming rate, and still we hadn't done anything. Perhaps the first challenge is boredom, I said. When will something happen? I should have known better than to say that aloud. Right in front of us, a shape loomed out of the darkness. A sandaled foot the size of a waterbed planted itself on the prow of our ship and stopped us dead in the water. It wasn't an attractive foot either. Definitely male. Its toes were splattered with mud, and its toenails were yellow, cracked and overgrown. The leather sandal straps were covered in lichen and barnacles. In short, the foot looked and smelled very much like it had been standing on the same rock in the middle of the river, wearing the same sandal for several thousand years. Unfortunately, it was attached to a leg, which was attached to a body. The giant leaned down to look at us. "You are bored?" His voice boomed, not in an unfriendly way. "I could kill you if that would help." He wore a kilt like Carter's, except that the giant's skirt could have supplied enough fabric to make 10 ship sails. His body was humanoid and muscular, covered with man fur, the sort of gross body hair that makes me want to start a charity waxing foundation for overly fuzzy men. He had the head of a ram, a white snout with a brass ring in his nose, and long curly horns hung with dozens of bronze bells. His eyes were set far apart, with luminous red irises and vertical slits for pupils. I suppose that all sounds rather frightening, but the ram man didn't strike me as devilish. In fact, he looked quite familiar for some reason. He seemed more melancholy than threatening, as if he'd been standing on his little rock island in the middle of the river for so long he'd forgotten why he was there. Carter asks when I became a ram whisperer. Do shut up, Carter. I honestly felt sorry for the ram man. His eyes were full of loneliness. I couldn't believe he would hurt us, until he drew from his belt 2 very large knives with curly blades like his horns. "You're silent," he noted. "Is that a yes for the killing?" "No, thanks," I said, trying to sound grateful for the offer. "One word and one question, please. The word is pedicure. The question is, who are you?" He said, bleating like a sheep. "If you knew my name, we wouldn't need introductions, and I could let you pass. Unfortunately, no one ever knows my name. A shame, too. I see you found the Book of Ra. You've revived his crew and managed to sail his boat to the gates of the 4th house. No one's ever gotten this far before. I'm terribly sorry I have to slice you to pieces." He hefted his knives, one in each hand. Our glowing orbs swarmed in a frenzy, whispering, "Yes, slice her, yes." "Just a mo," I called up to the giant. "If we name you, we can pass?" "Naturally," he sighed, "but no one ever can." I glanced at Carter. This wasn't the first time we'd been stopped on the river of night and challenged to name a guardian on pain of death. Apparently it was quite a common experience for Egyptian souls and magicians passing through the Duat, but I couldn't believe we'd get such an easy test. I was sure now that I recognized the Ram Man. We'd seen his statue in the Brooklyn Museum. "It's him, isn't it?" I asked Carter. "The chap who looks like Bullwinkle." "Don't call him Bullwinkle," Carter hissed. He looked up at the giant ram man and said, "You're Knoom, aren't you?" The ram man made a rumbling sound deep in his throat. He scraped one of his knives against the ship's rail. "Is that a question, or is it your final answer?" Carter blinked. Not our final answer," I yelped, realizing that we'd almost stepped into a trap. "Not even close. Knoom is your common name, isn't it? You want us to say your true name, your Wren." Knoom tilted his head, the bells on his horns jingling. "That would be nice, but alas, no one knows it. Even I have forgotten it." "How can you forget your own name?" Carter asked. "And yes, that's a question." "I am part of Ra," said the ram god. "I am his aspect in the underworld, a third of his personality. But when Ra stopped making his nightly journey, he no longer needed me. He left me here at the gates of the 4th house, discarded like an old coat. Now I guard the gates. I have no other purpose. If I could recover my name, I could yield my spirit to whoever frees me. They could reunite me with Ra, but until then, I cannot leave this place." He sounded horribly depressed, like a little lost sheep, or rather a 10-meter-tall lost sheep with very large knives. I wanted to help him. Even more than that, I wanted to find a way not to get myself sliced to bits. "If you don't remember your name," I said, "why couldn't we just tell you any old name? How would you know whether it was the right answer or not?" Knoom let his knives trail in the water. "I hadn't thought of that." Carter glared at me as if to say, "Why did you tell him?" The ram god bleated, "I think I will know my wren when I hear it," he decided, "though I cannot be sure. Being only part of Ra, I am not sure of much. I've lost most of my memories, most of my power and identity. I am no more than a husk of my former self." "Your former self must have been enormous," I muttered. The god might have smiled, though it was hard to tell with the ram face. "I'm sorry you don't have my wren. You're a bright girl. You're the first to make it this far. The first and the best." He sighed forlornly. "Ah, well, I suppose we should get to the killing." The first and the best. My mind started racing. "Wait," I said. "I know your name." Carter yelped. "You do? Tell him." I thought of a line from the Book of Ra. "First from chaos." I drew on the memories of Isis, the only goddess who had ever known Ra's secret name, and I began to understand the nature of the sun god. "Ra was the first god to rise out of chaos," I said. Knoom frowned. "That's my name?" "No, just listen," I said. "You said you're not complete without Ra, just a husk of your former self. But that's true of all the other Egyptian gods as well. Ra is older, more powerful. He's the original source of Maat. Like the taproot of the gods," Carter volunteered. "Right," I said. "I have no idea what a taproot is, but right. All these eons, the other gods have been slowly fading, losing power because Ra is missing. They might not admit it, but he's their heart. They're dependent on him. All this time we've been wondering if it was worth it to bring back Ra. We didn't know why it was so important, but now I understand." Carter nodded, slowly warming to the idea. "Ra's the center of Maat. He has to come back if the gods are going to win. And that's why Apophis wants to bring back Ra," I guessed. "The two are connected, Maat and Chaos. If Apophis can swallow Ra while the sun god is old and weak, all the gods die," Carter said. "The world crumbles into chaos." Knoom turned his head so he could study me with one glowing red eye. "That's all quite interesting," he said, "but I'm not hearing my secret name. To wake Ra, you must first name me." I opened the Book of Ra and took a deep breath. I began to read the first part of the spell. Now you may be thinking, "Gosh, Sadie, your big test was to read some words off a scroll. What's so hard about that?" If you think that, you've clearly never read a spell. Imagine reading aloud on stage in front of 1,000 hostile teachers who are waiting to give you bad marks. Imagine you can only read by looking at the backward reflection in a mirror. Imagine all the words are mixed around and you have to put the sentences together in the right order as you go. Imagine if you make one mistake, one stumble, one mispronunciation, you'll die. Imagine doing all that at once and you'll have some idea what it's like to cast a spell from a scroll. Despite that, I felt strangely confident. The spell suddenly made sense. "I name you first from chaos," I said. "Knoom, who is Ra, the evening sun. I summon your bar to awaken the Great One. For I am..." My first near-fatal mistake. The scroll said something like, "Insert your name here," and I almost read it aloud that way. "For I am insert your name here." Well, it would have been an honest mistake. Instead, I managed to say, "I am Sadie Kane, restorer of the throne of fire. I name you breath into clay, the ram of night's flock, the divine..." I almost lost it again. I was sure the Egyptian title said the divine Puta, but that made no sense unless Knoom had magic powers I didn't want to know about. Thankfully, I remembered something from the Brooklyn Museum. Knoom had been depicted as a potter sculpting a human from clay. The Divine Potter, I corrected myself. I name you Knoom, protector of the fourth gate. I return your name. I return your essence to Ra. The god's huge eyes dilated. His nostrils flared. Yes! He sheathed his knives. Well done, my lady. You may pass into the fourth house, but beware the fires, and be prepared for the second form of Ra. He will not be so grateful for your help. What do you mean? I asked, but the ram god's body dissolved into mist. The Book of Ra sucked in the wisps of smoke, and it rolled shut. Knoom and his island were gone. The boat drifted on into a narrower tunnel. Sadie, Carter said, that was amazing. Normally I would have been happy to astonish him with my brilliance, but my heart was racing, my hands were sweating, and I thought I might throw up. On top of that, I could feel the glowing orb crew coming out of their shock, beginning to fight me again. No slice, they complained. No slice. Mind your own business, I thought back at them, and keep the boat going. Sadie? Carter asked. Why is your face turning red? I thought he was accusing me of blushing. Then I realized he too was red. The whole boat was awash in ruby light. I turned to look ahead of us, and I made a sound in my throat not too different from Knoom's bleating. Oh, no, I said. Not this place again. Roughly 100 meters ahead of us, the tunnel opened into a huge cavern. I recognized the massive, boiling lake of fire, but the last time I hadn't seen it from this angle. We were picking up speed, heading down a series of rapids like a water slide. At the end of the rapids, the water turned into a fiery waterfall and dropped straight down into the lake about a half a mile below. We were hurtling toward the precipice with absolutely no way to stop. Keep the boat going, the crew whispered with glee. Keep the boat going. We probably had less than a minute, but it seemed longer. I suppose if time flies when you're having fun, it really creeps when you're hurtling toward your death. We've got to turn around, Carter said. Even if that wasn't fire, we'll never survive the drop. He began yelling at the orbs of light. Turn around! Paddle! Mayday! They happily ignored him. I stared at the flaming drop to oblivion and the lake of fire below. Despite the waves of heat rolling over us like dragon breath, I felt cold. I realized what needed to happen. Reborn in fire, I said. What? Carter asked. It's a line from the Book of Ra. We can't turn around. We have to go over, straight into the lake. Are you crazy? We'll burn up. I ripped open my magic bag and rummaged through my supplies. We have to take the ship through the fire. That was part of the sun's nightly rebirth, right? Ra would have done it. Ra wasn't flammable. The waterfall was only 20 meters away now. My hands trembled as I poured ink into my writing palette. If you've never tried to use a calligraphy set while standing up on a boat, it isn't easy. What are you doing? Carter asked. Writing your will? I took a deep breath and dipped my stylus in black ink. I visualized the hieroglyphs I needed. I wished Zia were with us. Not just because we had hit it off rather well in Cairo. Oh, stop pouting, Carter. It's not my fault she realized I'm the brilliant one in the family. But because Zia was an expert with fire glyphs, and that's just what we needed. Push up your hair, I told Carter. I need to paint your forehead. I'm not plunging to my death with loser painted on my head. I'm trying to save you. Hurry! He pushed his hair out of the way. I painted the glyphs for fire and shield on his forehead, and immediately my brother burst into flame. I know, it was like a dream come true and a nightmare all at once. He danced around, spewing some very creative curse words before realizing that the fire wasn't hurting him. He was simply encased in a protective sheet of flames. What exactly? His eyes widened. Hold on to something. The boat tipped sickeningly over the edge of the falls. I dashed the hieroglyphs onto the back of my hand, but it wasn't a good copy. The flames spluttered weakly around me. Alas, I didn't have time for anything better. I wrapped my arms around the rail, and we plummeted straight down. Strange how many things can go through your mind as you fall to certain doom. From up high, the lake of fire looked quite beautiful, like the surface of the sun. I wondered if I would feel any pain on impact, or if we would simply evaporate. It was hard to see anything as we plummeted through the ash and smoke, but I thought I spotted a familiar island about a mile away, the Black Temple where I'd first met Anubis. I wondered if he could see me from there, and if he would rush to my rescue. I wondered if my chances of survival would be better if I pushed away from the boat and fell like a cliff diver, but I couldn't make myself do it. I held onto the rail with all my might. I wasn't sure if the magical fire shield was protecting me, but I was sweating fiercely, and I was fairly certain I'd left my throat and most of my internal organs at the top of the waterfall. Finally, we hit bottom with an understated boom. How to describe the sensation of plunging into a lake of liquid fire? Well, it burned, and yet it was somehow wet too. I didn't dare breathe. After a moment's hesitation, I opened my eyes. All I could see were swirling red and yellow flames. We were still underwater, or under fire. I realized two things. I was not burning to death, and the boat was moving forward. I couldn't believe my crazy protection glyphs had actually worked. As the boat slid through the swirling currents of heat, the voices of the crew whispered in my mind, more joyful than angry now. "Renew," they said. "New life, new light." That sounded promising until I grasped some less pleasant facts. I still couldn't breathe. My body liked breathing. Also, it was getting much hotter. I could feel my protection glyph failing, the ink burning against my hand. I reached out blindly and grabbed an arm. Carter's, I assumed. We held hands, and even though I couldn't see him, it was comforting to know he was there. Perhaps it was my imagination, but the heat seemed to lessen. Long ago, Amos had told us that we were more powerful together. We increased each other's magic just by being in proximity. I hoped that was true now. I tried to send my thoughts to Carter, urging him to help me maintain the fire shield. The ship sailed on through the flames. I thought we were starting to ascend, but it might have been wishful thinking. My vision began to go dark. My lungs were screaming. If I inhaled fire, I wondered if I would end up like Vlad Menshikov. Just when I knew I would pass out, the boat surged upward and we broke the surface. I gasped, and not just because I needed the air. We had docked at the shoreline of the boiling lake, in front of a large limestone gateway, like the entrance to the ancient temple I'd seen at Luxor. I was still holding Carter's hand. As far as I could tell, we were both fine. The sunboat was better than fine. It had been renewed. Its sail gleamed white, the symbol of the sun shining gold in its center. The oars were repaired and newly polished. The paint was freshly lacquered black and gold and green. The hull no longer leaked, and the tent house was once more a beautiful pavilion. There was no throne and no Ra, but the crew glowed brightly and cheerfully as they tied off the lines to the dock. I couldn't help it. I threw my arms around Carter and let out a sob. "Are you all right?" He pulled away awkwardly and nodded. The glyph on his forehead had burned off. "Thanks to you," he said. "Where?" "Sunny Acres," said a familiar voice. Bess came down the steps to the dock. He wore a new, even louder Hawaiian shirt and only his Speedo for pants, so I can't say he was a sight for sore eyes. Now that he was in the Duat, he fairly glowed with power. His hair had turned darker and curlier, and his face looked decades younger. "Bess," I said, "what took you so long? Are Watson's here?" "They're fine," he said, "and I told you I'd meet you at the 4th house." He jabbed his thumb at a sign carved into the limestone archway. "Used to be called the House of Rest. Apparently, they've changed the name." The sign was in hieroglyphs, but I had no trouble reading it. "Sunny Acres Assisted Living Community," I read. "Formerly the House of Rest, under new management." "What's exactly—" "We should get going," Bess said, "before your stalker arrives." "Stalker?" Carter asked. Vess pointed to the top of the fiery waterfall, now a good half-mile away. At first I didn't see anything. Then there was a streak of white against the red flames, as if a man in an ice cream suit had plunged into the lake. Apparently I hadn't imagined that white smudge in the darkness. We were being followed. "Menshikov?" I said. That's bad news," Bess said. "Now come on. We have to find the sun god." 20. We visit the House of the Helpful Hippo. Hospitals, classrooms. Now I'll add to my list of least favourite places, old people's homes. That may sound odd, as I lived with my grandparents. I suppose their flat counts as an old people's home. But I mean institutions, nursing homes. Those are the worst. They smell like an unholy mixture of canteen food, cleaning supplies, and pensioners. The inmates, patients, always look so miserable. And the homes have absurdly happy names like Sunny Acres. Please. We stepped through the limestone gateway into a large open hall, the Egyptian version of assisted living. Rows of colourfully painted columns were studded with iron sconces holding blazing torches. Potted palms and flowering hibiscus plants were placed here and there in a failed attempt to make the place feel cheerful. Large windows looked out on the lake of fire, which I suppose was a nice view if you enjoyed brimstone. The walls were painted with scenes of the Egyptian afterlife, along with jolly hieroglyphic mottos like "Immortality with Security" and "Life Starts at 3000. Glowing servant lights and clay sharpty in white medical uniforms bustled about, carrying trays of medication and pushing wheelchairs. The patients, however, didn't bustle much. A dozen withered figures in linen hospital gowns sat around the room, staring vacantly into space. A few wandered the room, pushing wheelie poles with IV bags. All wore bracelets with their names in hieroglyphs. Some looked human, but many had animal heads. An old man with the head of a crane rocked back and forth in a metal folding chair, pecking at a game of Senet on the coffee table. An old woman with a grizzled lioness's head scooted herself around in a wheelchair, mumbling, "Meow, meow." A shriveled, blue-skinned man, not much taller than Bess, hugged one of the limestone columns and cried softly, as if he were afraid the column might try to leave him. In other words, the scene was thoroughly depressing. "What is this place?" I asked. "Are those all gods?" Carter seemed just as mystified as I was. Bess looked like he was about to crawl out of his skin. "Never actually been here," he admitted. "Heard rumors, but..." He swallowed as if he'd just eaten a spoonful of peanut butter. "Come on, let's ask at the nurse's station." The desk was a crescent of granite with a row of telephones, though I couldn't imagine who they'd call from the Duarte, a computer, lots of clipboards, and a platter-sized stone disc with a triangular fin, a sundial, which seemed strange as there was no sun. Behind the counter, a short, heavy woman stood with her back to us, checking a whiteboard with names and medication times. Her glossy black hair was plaited down her back like an extra-large beaver's tail, and her nurse's cap barely fit on her wide head. We were halfway to the desk when Bess froze. "It's her!" "Who?" Carter asked. "This is bad." Bess turned pale. "I should have known. Curse it! You'll have to go without me." I looked more closely at the nurse, who still had her back to us. She did seem a bit imposing, with massive, beefy arms, a neck thicker than my waist, and oddly tinted purplish skin, but I couldn't understand why she bothered Bess so much. I turned to ask him, but Bess had ducked behind the nearest potted plant. It wasn't big enough to hide him, and certainly didn't camouflage his Hawaiian shirt. "Bess, stop it," I said. "Shh, I'm invisible." Carter sighed. "We don't have time for this. Come on, Sadie." He led the way to the nurse's station. "Excuse us," he called across the desk. The nurse turned and I yelped. I tried to contain my shock, but it was difficult, as the woman was a hippopotamus. I don't mean that as an unflattering comparison. She was actually a hippo. Her long snout was shaped like an upside-down Valentine heart, with bristly whiskers, tiny nostrils, and a mouth with 2 large bottom teeth. Her eyes were small and beady. Her face looked quite odd, framed with luxurious black hair, but it wasn't nearly as peculiar as her body. She wore her nurse's blouse open like a jacket, revealing a bikini top that, how to put this delicately, was trying to cover a very great deal of top with very little fabric. Her purple-pink belly was incredibly swollen, as if she were 9 months pregnant. "May I help you?" she asked. Her voice was pleasant and kindly, not what one would expect from a hippopotamus. Come to think of it, I wouldn't expect any voice from a hippopotamus. Hippo? I mean, hello, I stammered. My brother and I are looking for... I glanced at Carter and found he was not staring at the nurse's face. Carter? What? He shook himself out of his trance. Right, sorry. Aren't you a goddess? Tawaret or something? The hippo woman bared her 2 enormous teeth and what I hoped was a smile. Why, how nice to be recognized. Yes, dear, I'm Tawaret. You said you were looking for someone, a relative? Are you gods? Behind us, the potted hibiscus rustled as Bess picked it up and tried to move it behind a column. Tawaret's eyes widened. "Is that Bess?" she called. "Bess!" The dwarf stood abruptly and brushed off his shirt. His face was redder than Set's. "Plant looks like it's getting enough water," he muttered. "I should check the ones over there." He started to walk away, but Tawaret called again. "Bess! It's me, Tawaret! Over here!"
Over here!
Bess stiffened like she'd shot him in the back. He turned with a tortured smile. "Well, hey, Tawaret! Wow!" She scrambled out from behind the desk, wearing high heels that seemed inadvisable for a pregnant water mammal. She spread her chubby arms for a hug, and Bess thrust out his hand to shake. They ended up doing an awkward sort of dance, half hug, half shake, which made one thing perfectly obvious to me. "So, you 2 used to date?" I asked. Bess shot eye daggers at me. Tawaret blushed, which made it the first time I'd ever embarrassed a hippo. "A long time ago." Tawaret turned to the dwarf god. "Bess, how are you? After that horrible time at the palace, I was afraid—" "Good!" he shouted. "Yes, thanks, good! You're good? Good! We're here on important business, as Sadie was about to tell you." He kicked me in the shin, which I thought quite unnecessary. "Yes, right," I said. "We're looking for Ra, to awaken him." If Bess had been hoping to redirect Tawaret's train of thought, the plan worked. Tawaret opened her mouth in a silent gasp, and as if I'd just suggested something horrible, like a hippo hunt. "Awaken Ra?" she said. "Oh, dear. Oh, that is unfortunate. Bess, you're helping them with this?" He stuttered. "Just, you know." "Bess is doing us a favor," I said. "Our friend Bast asked him to look after us." I could tell right away I'd made matters worse. The temperature in the air seemed to drop 10 degrees. "I see," Tawaret said. "A favor for Bast." I wasn't sure what I'd said wrong, but I tried my best to backtrack. Please, look, the fate of the world is at stake. It's very important we find Ra." Tawaret crossed her arms skeptically. "Dear, he's been missing for millennia, and trying to awaken him would be terribly dangerous. Why now?" "Tell us, Sadie." Bess inched backward as if preparing to dive into the hibiscus. "No secrets here. Tawaret can be trusted completely." "Bess." She perked up immediately and fluttered her eyelashes. "Do you mean that?" "Sadie, talk," Bess pleaded. And so I did. I showed Tawaret the Book of Ra. I explained why we needed to wake the sun god, the threat of Apophis's ascension, mass chaos and destruction, the world about to end at sunrise, etc. It was difficult to judge her hippo-ish expressions. "Yes, Carter, I'm sure that's a word. But as I spoke, Tawaret twirled her long black hair nervously. "That's not good," she said. "Not good at all." She glanced behind her at the sundial. Despite the lack of sun, the needle cast a clear shadow over the hieroglyphic number 5. "You're running out of time," she said. Carter frowned at the sundial. "Isn't this place the 4th house of the night?" "Yes, dear," Tawaret agreed. "It goes by different names. Sunny Acres, the House of Rest, but it's also the 4th house." "So how can the sundial be on 5? He asked. "Shouldn't we be, like, frozen at the 4th hour?" "Doesn't work that way, kid," Bess put in. "Time in the mortal world doesn't stop passing just because you're in the 4th house. If you want to follow the sun god's voyage, you have to keep in sync with his timing." I felt a head-splitting explanation coming on. I was ready to accept blissful ignorance and get on with finding Ra, but Carter, naturally, wouldn't let it drop. "So what happens if we get too far behind?" he asked. Tawaret checked the sundial again, which was slowly creeping past 5. "The houses are connected to their times of night. You can stay in each one as long as you want, but you can only enter or exit them close to the hours they represent." "Uh-huh." I rubbed my temples. "Do you have any headache medicine behind that nurse's station?" "It's not that confusing," said Carter, just to be annoying. "It's like a revolving door. You have to wait for an opening and jump in." "More or less," Tawaret agreed. "There is a little wiggle room with most of the houses. You can leave the 4th house, for instance, pretty much whenever you want. But certain gates are impossible to pass unless you time it exactly right. You can only enter the 1st house at sunset. You can only exit the 12th house at dawn. And the gates of the 8th house, the House of Challenges, can only be entered during the 8th hour." "House of Challenges?" I said. I hate it already. "Oh, you have Bess with you." Tawaret stared at him dreamily. "The challenges won't be a problem." Bess shot me a panicked look like, "Save me." "But if you take too long," Tawaret continued, "the gates will close before you can get there. You'll be locked in the Duat until tomorrow night." "And if we don't stop Apophis," I said, "there won't be a tomorrow night. That part I understand." "So can you help us?" Carter asked Tawaret. "Where is Ra?" The goddess fidgeted with her hair. Her hands were a cross between human and hippo, with short, stubby fingers and thick nails. "That's the problem, dear," she said. "I don't know. The 4th house is enormous. Ra is probably here somewhere, but the hallways and doors go on forever. We have so many patients." "Don't you keep track of them?" Carter asked. "Isn't there a map or something?" Tawaret shook her head sadly. "I do my best, but it's just me, the Sharpty, and the servant lights, and there are thousands of old guards." My heart sank. They could barely keep track of 10 or so major gods I'd met, but thousands? In this room alone, I counted a dozen patients, 6 hallways leading off in different directions, 2 staircases, and 3 elevators. Perhaps it was my imagination, but it seemed as if some of the hallways had appeared since we'd entered the room. "All these old folks are gods?" I asked. Tawaret nodded. "Most were minor deities, even in ancient times. The magicians didn't consider them worth imprisoning. Over the centuries, they've wasted away, lonely and forgotten. Eventually, they made their way here. They simply wait." "To die?" I asked. Tawaret got a faraway look in her eyes. "I wish I knew. Sometimes they disappear, but I don't know if they simply get lost wandering the halls, or find a new room to hide in, or truly fade to nothing. The sad truth is it amounts to the same thing. Their names have been forgotten by the world above. Once your name is no longer spoken, what good is life?" She glanced at Bess as if trying to tell him something. The dwarf god looked away quickly. "That's Mekit, isn't it?" He pointed to the old lion woman who was making her way around in a wheelchair. "She had a temple near Abydos, I think. Minor lion goddess. Always got confused with Sekhmet." The lioness snarled weakly when Bess said the name Sekhmet. Then she went back to rolling her chair, muttering, "Meow, meow." "Sad story," Tawaret said. "She came here with her husband, the god Onurus. They were a celebrity couple in the old days, so romantic. He once traveled all the way to Nubia to rescue her. They got married. Happy ending, we all thought. But they were both forgotten. They came here together. Then Onurus disappeared. Mekit's mind began to go quickly after that. Now she rolls her chair around the room aimlessly all day. She can't remember her own name, that we keep reminding her." I thought about Kanoom, whom we'd met on the river, and how sad he'd seemed, not knowing his secret name. I looked at the old goddess Mekit, meowing and snarling and scooting along with no memory of her former glory. I imagined trying to care for 1,000 gods like that, senior citizens who never got better and never died. "Tawaret, how can you stand it?" I said in awe. "Why do you work here?" She touched her nurse's cap self-consciously. "A long story, dear, and we have very little time. I wasn't always here. I was once a protector goddess. I scared away demons, though not as well as Bess." "You were plenty scary," Bess said. The hippo goddess sighed with adoration. "That's so sweet. I also protected mothers given birth." "Because you're pregnant?" Carter asked, nodding at her enormous belly. Tawaret looked mystified. "No. Why would you think that?" So, I broke in, "you were explaining why you take care of aging gods." Tawaret checked the sundial, and I was alarmed to see how fast the shadow was creeping towards 6. "I've always liked to help people, but in the world above, well, it became clear I wasn't needed anymore." She was careful not to look at Bess, but the dwarf god blushed even more. "Someone was needed to look after the aging gods," Tawaret continued. "I suppose I understand their sadness. I understand about waiting forever." Bess coughed into his fist. "Look at the time. Yes, about Ra. Have you seen him since you've been working here?" Tawaret considered. "It's possible. I saw a falcon-headed guard in a room in the southeast wing, ages ago. I thought it was Nemti, but it's possible it could have been Ra. He sometimes liked to go about in falcon form." "Which way?" I pleaded. "If we can get close, the Book of Ra may be able to guide us." Tawaret turned to Bess. "Are you asking me for this, Bess? Do you truly believe it's important, or are you just doing it because Bast told you to?" "No, yes." He puffed out his cheeks in exasperation. Yes, it's important, yes. I'm asking. I need your help." Tawaret pulled a torch from the nearest sconce. "In that case, right this way." We wandered the halls of an infinite magic nursing home, led by a hippo nurse with a torch. Really just an ordinary night for the Kanes. We passed so many bedrooms I lost count. Most of the doors were closed, but a few were open, showing frail old gods in their beds, staring at the flickering blue light of televisions, or simply lying in the dark, crying. After 20 or 30 such rooms, I stopped looking. It was too depressing. I held the Book of Ra, hoping it would get warmer as we approached the sun god, but no such luck. Tawaret hesitated at each intersection. I could tell she felt uncertain about where she was leading us. After a few more hallways and still no change in the scroll, I began to feel frantic. Carter must have noticed. "It's okay," he promised. "We'll find him." I remembered how fast the sundial had been moving at the nurses' station, and I thought about Vlad Menshikov. I wanted to believe he'd been turned into a deep-fried Russian when he fell into the lake of fire, but that was probably too much to hope for. If he was still hunting us, he couldn't be far behind. We turned down another corridor, and Tawaret froze. Oh, dear. In front of us, an old woman with the head of a frog was jumping around. And when I say jumping, I mean she leapt 10 feet, croaked a few times, then leapt against the wall and stuck there before leaping to the opposite wall. Her body and limbs looked human, dressed in a green hospital gown, but her head was all amphibian, brown, moist, and warty. Her bulbous eyes turned in every direction, and by the distressed sound of her croaking, I guessed she was lost. "Her cat's got out again," Tawaret said. "Excuse me a moment." She hurried over to the frog woman. Bess pulled a handkerchief from the pocket of his Hawaiian shirt. He dabbed his forehead nervously. "I wondered what had ever happened to her cat. She's the frog goddess, you know." "I never would have guessed," Carter said. I watched as Tawaret tried to calm down the old goddess. She spoke in soothing tones, promising to help her cat find her room if she'd just stop bouncing off the walls. "She's brilliant," I said. "Tawaret, I mean." "Yeah," Bess said. "Yeah, she's fine." "Fine?" I said. "Clearly she likes you. Why are you so—" Suddenly the truth smacked me in the face. I felt almost as thick as Carter. "Oh, I see. She mentioned a horrible time at a palace, didn't she? She's the one who freed you in Russia." Bess mopped his neck with the handkerchief. He really was sweating quite a lot. "What makes you say that?" "Because you're so embarrassed around her. Like," I was about to say, "like she's seen you in your underpants," but I doubted that would mean much to the god of Speedos. "Like she's seen you at your worst, and you want to forget it." Bess stared at Tawaret with a pained expression, the way he had stared at Prince Menshikov's palace in St. Petersburg. "She's always saving me," he said bitterly. "She's always wonderful, nice, kind. Back in ancient times, everyone assumed we were dating. They always said we were a cute couple, the two demon-scaring gods, the two misfits, whatever. We did go out a few times, but Tawaret was just too nice, and I was kind of obsessed with somebody else." "Bast?" Carter guessed. The dwarf god's shoulders slumped. "That obvious, huh? Yeah, Bast. She was the most popular goddess with the common folk. I was the most popular god, so, you know, we'd see each other at festivals and such. She was, well, beautiful." Typical man, I thought, only seeing the surface, but I kept my mouth shut. "Anyway," Bess sighed, "Bast treated me like a little brother. She still does. Has no interest in me at all. But it took me a long time to realize that. I was so obsessed I wasn't very good to Tawaret over the years." "But she came to get you in Russia," I said. He nodded. "I sent out distress calls. I thought Bast would come to my aid, or Horace, or somebody. I didn't know where they all were, you understand, but I had a lot of friends back in the old days. I figured somebody would show up. The only one who did was Tawaret. She risked her life sneaking into the palace during the dwarf wedding. She saw the whole thing, saw me humiliated in front of the big folk. During the night, she broke my cage and freed me. I owe her everything. But once I was free, I just fled. I was so ashamed I couldn't look at her. Every time I think of her, I think about that night, and I hear the laughing." The pain in his voice was raw, as if he were describing something that had happened yesterday, not 3 centuries ago. "Bess, it isn't her fault," I said gently. "She cares about you. It's obvious." "It's too late," he said. "I've hurt her too much. I wish I could turn back the clock, but—" He faltered. Tawaret was walking toward us, leading the frog goddess by the arm. "Now, dear," Tawaret said, "just come with us and we'll find your room. No need for leaping." But it's a leap of faith, Hackett croaked.
It's a
I mean,
leap
she
of
made that sound. She
faith.
didn't die in front of us, thankfully. My temple is around here somewhere. It was in Kus. Lovely city. Yes, dear, Tawaret said. But your temple is gone now. All our temples are gone. You have a nice bedroom, though. No, Hackett murmured. The priests will have sacrifices for me. I have to... She fixed her large yellow eyes on me, and I understood how a fly must feel right before it's zapped by a frog tongue. That's my priestess, Hackett said. She's come to visit me. No, dear, Tawaret said. That's Sadie Kane. My priestess. Hackett patted my shoulder with her moist, webbed hand, and I did my best not to cringe. Tell the temple to start without me, will you? I'll be along later. Will you tell them? Yeah, I said. Of course, Lady Hackett. Good, good. Her eyes became unfocused. Very sleepy now. Hard work remembering. Yes, dear, Tawaret said. Why don't you lie down in one of these rooms for now? She shepherded Hackett into the nearest vacant room. Bess followed her with sad eyes. I'm a terrible dwarf. Perhaps I should have reassured her, but my mind was racing on to other matters. Start without me, Hackett had said. A leap of faith. Suddenly I found it hard to breathe. Sadie, Carter asked, what's wrong? I know why the scroll isn't guiding us, I said. I have to start the second part of the spell. But we're not there yet, Carter said. And we won't be unless I start the spell. It's part of finding Ra. What is? Tawaret appeared at Bessie's side and almost scared the dwarf out of his Hawaiian shirt. The spell, I said. I have to take a leap of faith. I think the frog goddess infected her, Carter fretted. No, you don't, I said. This is the only way to find Ra, I'm sure of it. Hey, kid, Bess said. If you start that spell and we don't find Ra by the time you're finished reading it, I know, the spell will backfire. When I said backfire, I meant it quite literally. If the spell didn't find its proper target, the power of the Book of Ra might blow up in my face. It's the only way, I insisted. We don't have time to wander the halls forever, and Ra will only appear if we invoke him. We have to prove ourselves by taking the risk. You'll have to lead me. I can't stumble on the words. You have courage, dear. Tawaret held up her torch.
Dear.
Don't worry. I'll guide you. Just do your reading. I opened the scroll to the second section. The rows of hieroglyphs, which had once seemed like disconnected phrases of rubbish, now made perfect sense. I invoke the name of Ra, I read aloud, the sleeping king, lord of the noonday sun, who sits upon the throne of fire. Well, you get the idea. I described how Ra rose from the sea of chaos. I recalled his light shining on the primordial land of Egypt, bringing life to the Nile Valley. As I read, I felt warmer. Sadie, Carter said, you're smoking. Hard not to panic when someone makes a comment like that, but I realized Carter was right. Smoke was curling off my body, forming a column of grey that drifted down the hallway. Is it my imagination, Carter asked, or is the smoke showing us the way? Ow! He said that last part because I stomped his foot, which I could do quite well without breaking my concentration. He got the message. Shut up and start walking. Tawaret took my arm and guided me forward. Bess and Carter flanked us like security guards. We followed the trail of smoke down 2 more corridors and up a flight of stairs. The Book of Ra became uncomfortably warm in my hands. The smoke from my body began obscuring the letters. You're doing well, Sadie, Tawaret said. This hallway looks familiar. I don't know how she could tell, but I stayed focused on the scroll. I described Ra's sunboat sailing across the sky. I spoke of his kingly wisdom and the battles he'd won against Apophis. A bead of sweat trickled down my face. My eyes began to burn. I hoped they weren't literally on fire. When I came to the line, Ra, the sun's zenith. I realized we'd stopped in front of a door. It didn't look any different from any other door, but I pushed it open and stepped inside. I kept reading, though I was quickly approaching the end of the spell. Inside, the room was dark. In the sputtering light of Tawarit's torch, I saw the oldest man in the world sleeping in bed. His face shriveled, his arms like sticks, his skin so translucent I could see every vein. Some of the mummies in Baharia had looked more alive than this old husk. "The light of Ra returns," I read. I nodded at the heavily curtained windows, and fortunately Bess and Carter got my meaning. They yanked back the curtains, and red light from the lake of fire flooded the room. The old man didn't move. His mouth was pursed like his lips had been sewn together. I moved to his bedside and kept reading. I described Ra awakening at dawn, sitting in his throne as his boat climbed the sky, the plants turning toward the warmth of the sun. "It's not working," Bess muttered. I began to panic. There were only 2 lines left. I could feel the power of the spell backing up, beginning to overheat my body. I was still smoking, and I didn't like the smell of flame-broiled Sadie. I had to awaken Ra, or I'd burn alive. God's mouth, of course. I set the scroll on Ra's bed and did my best to hold it